What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to Pro v Pro. PGA Championship was a really, really good event. Not the difficult scoring environment that we were hoping for. Not the success that I can tell you that I was hoping for on DraftKings or in the betting market. Needed a solid round 4 from Sahith Theegala. We did not get that. We did not get anything close to that. We got the polar opposite of a solid round from him. But it was still a fun week. How was your PGA Championship experience, Justin?
Obviously, with the Rahm struggles, I struggled. I was pretty high on Rahm, and it wasn't very fun to watch. He never had a chance. There was never like a Rahm moment where like, oh, there's the Rahm we know. Mm-hmm. 60-yard pitch shots hitting him 40 feet long and 3-putting early on, and just stuff that you can't do as that high of a level of golfer. It's a weird vibe to me because I really don't know what to think of him now. We've seen it, now a couple of times in majors, and maybe this live deal is having a real effect on him. And then you can jump right into DeChambeau, who I feel like is now in his element and has had a positive effect on him. So not a very good week for me, gambling and DFS-wise, but it was a fun week, and I think we learned a lot of things too.
Yeah. I'll tell you, the way that I would sum up my experience this week on DraftKings especially is that every single time that I was looking at, let's say, like a group of 5 guys that all rated well or something, and I had to pick 2 of those 5, I picked the wrong 2. The other 3 went off. The 2 that I had stunk. But hey, we're gonna have some of those weeks. We've already had a lot of weeks where like the 2 that I ended up picking were the 2 that played well, and the other 3 stunk. So that's life. That's DFS especially. But you mentioned something there that I think is worth touching on. There were reports that Rahm was treated pretty coldly by some of like his former friends on tour, and that may have impacted him. I have no idea if there's any truth to that, but I do think there's absolutely a case to be made that one of the reasons why Rahm hasn't had the success that he would like to have in these first 2 major championships is that it's just not a comfortable experience for him. He can't be on the golf course with the sole thought of, I want to go win this thing.
Yeah, like I said, Rahm, I just think kind of cares too much. And I feel bad for these guys that like whoever these former friends are that are bagging on him for taking $500 million to what we already make fun of the PGA Tour for how poorly they're run and what's going on. And they've continued to prove it over and over again. I think the joke's going to end up being on them. By the time we're all done, it's going to be these guys that have acted like that towards Rahm or anybody else. And I think Rahm cares. Like, I think he's a sincere person. I think that's part of it. I think that's why you get a guy like DeChambeau, who's kind of not a social dude anyway. He just doesn't care. He's not there to make friends, so to speak. He's there to take care of business. And maybe that is the biggest role that's going on with Rahm right now and why he's struggling. I don't know. I just know he's a lot better. We're not very far removed from calling him the best player in the world to now. Is he a top 20 player in the world the way he's looked? Probably not.
I think that Rahm expected that his move to live would make a much larger impact on the overall landscape of golf. I think he expected that he could then help not necessarily unite the tours, but move golf forward, make some kind of deal happen, and that people would look at him as like the reason why golf got back together. So I think there are layers to it. Number one, he's disappointed that he wasn't able to have a larger effect. Number two, he's now disappointed that he's kind of stuck on live, playing a format that we know he doesn't love. We know that he doesn't think that highly from a competitive standpoint. And number three, it's making it a lot harder for him to perform well in the major. So I feel a little bit bad for him, but I also then see the player side of it, which is like, if you really thought that you were going to be the guy to kind of save golf, number one, you were delusional, and instead you ended up making one of the decisions that hurt golf the most. So I see both sides of the argument. On the other hand, I think you then see a guy like Bryson, who very clearly just everything about that decision for him has helped him. He seems happier. I think the thing about Bryson that stands out the most to me is for almost every single guy who chose to go to live, one of my takes is that it seems like a really uncompetitive decision. Stay on the PGA Tour. Cam Smith, Koepka, DJ, Rahm especially, like, try to be the best golfer in the world. If you go to LIV, you can't do that. And yet with Bryson, you can't possibly say it was a non-competitive decision because he's still obsessed about being the best golfer that he can possibly be. He's working as hard or harder than anybody else in the world on doing that. And he's doing so successfully, clearly as prepared as anybody for these major championships. So I didn't love the decision in the moment for Bryson, but as far as like people who went go, I've got to give him credit.
For sure. Bryson deserves all the credit. I think Cam Smith is enjoying it. I think Cam Smith is better. I'm not saying that he's a better golfer now than maybe he has been. He doesn't. I think that a large part of why he's not talked about as being better is he just hasn't played good at the right times because he doesn't have as many chances, right? He doesn't have as many opportunities to win a PGA Tour event. But I don't think he cares. Like, I don't think he's a worse golfer.
But the fact that he doesn't care is exactly why I think it's a non-competitive decision. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, no, I'm saying he doesn't. I don't think he cares that the view of him is that he's not as good as he is. He's out there still trying hard. He's still trying to win majors. He just hasn't played good at the right time. I just don't think that he kind of has the Bryson mentality of, I don't care what this person thinks about me.
I agree with that. But when he won the Open Championship, like, he was fully cemented in the conversation of, could this guy actually be the best player in the world? Not in the moment, but let's say he comes out the next year, wins Augusta, has a couple wins, prior to Augusta. In that case, we're talking about him as, is this guy the best in the world? Now, he might not care about the way people are talking about him, but he should care about potentially being the best player in the world. When you go to LIV, you take that possibility completely out.
So I guess the other side of this is, do you think we're closer to a deal with LIV now, the PGA Tour is now, than ever because of all these people like on the board, they're all quitting and they're all saying that Monahan's not getting anywhere and he's not even trying and he doesn't care. And you've got a LIV guy that competed. Not only did Bryson compete and have a chance to win, but he was obviously the most polarizing person there. Mm-hmm. It wasn't even close. Well, look at the way the crowd handled him, the way the crowd was behind him, how they cheered, the following, the way he was talked about, all over Twitter, all over social media. He clearly moved the needle this week. And is that going to force the PGA Tour's hand to saying, hey, we've got one guy moving the needle. It's only going to take a couple of more to where we're really going to start losing? Because I've already heard of 3 or 4 different people that haven't watched a LIV event ever, and they're going to watch the Houston event because they, see that they're still playing competitive golf. So, and that's just, my buddies. They're like, hey, I'm going to, how do you watch this? They didn't even know how to watch it. How do you watch this LIV event? So I think you combine that with the fact that these people they're just dropping the ball, right? They're just quitting on the board. They're saying nobody wants to do anything, and they just kind of had enough. And now as that's come out, I don't know if you saw LIV just rented a huge office space in New York City where they're going to have 90 employees. So they obviously have plans to do something, right? You don't do that just for fun. I think that we're going to learn but I'm not going to say it'll be like next week, but by the end of this year, we're going to know a lot more than we know right now. And the second most polarizing guy I thought this week was Viktor Hovland. And that's because obviously improvement back to his coach, like we had talked about, got a lot better. And he's been a lot of talk about him going to LIV. So if you get somebody like Hovland that goes over there, then the needle's really moved that direction. I just think the PGA Tour is going to have to do something, and I don't know what that is or how that's going to come about. Or we've speculated a lot, but I just think we're getting closer than maybe the general public thinks.
I see and hear so many rumblings on Twitter and elsewhere that I have no idea like what's true and what's just kind of hopeful speculation. The thing that passes the smell test the most for me that I keep seeing is that the talks of any kind of agreement are basically stalled out until Monahan's gone. That like Monahan being gone is a precursor to anything getting done. I hope that happens sooner than later. I think everybody, absolutely everybody, the most diehard PGA Tour fans, the most anti-LIV people, and the most pro-live, anti-PGA Tour people all agree Monahan gone is a step in the right direction. So hopefully that happens sooner than later.
I just don't understand why why do we see nobody that, and I think maybe we are closer to that than most anybody else in the industry that can be, hey, live is good for golf, live is good, and still be pro PGA Tour. They just need to make some changes. It seems like all the live guys are just like anti PGA Tour. Like if you love live, you just hate the tour. Whereas we I feel like are more, hey, let's get rid of Monahan, let's make some changes, but they can coexist, and maybe the end game might be better for golf. We're just not there yet.
I think it's that there's a separation here. There's like a compartmentalization, if you will, where there are almost two discussions. Number one was the creation of live and the initial move for some players from the PGA Tour to live, was that good for golf or was that bad for golf? I think unquestionably that was bad for golf. But now that live exists, is there a scenario in which you create this like coexisting structure where it's almost like the Champions League in soccer, as we talked about earlier this year, where that could be good for golf? I think that answer is yes. So there's a path now for live being good for golf, especially compared to where it is in this moment, in this chaotic mess, and also recognizing that the way it was created and the fact that these players just left the PGA Tour and really hurt the overall competitive nature of professional golf, that in and of itself was bad.
Yeah, but so you have to do it, right? And it's the same thing goes on so many different things in life. I mean, all the way down to politics, right? Until you change something, we're just going to keep going through the same thing. You take it, for instance, that you're getting golf lessons, right? How many times do you hear you got to go 2 steps back to go 3 steps forward? Mm-hmm. It's the same idea, right? You had somebody had to do something to make a change. If we just keep doing the same thing.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think the optimal outcome would have been that like a band of players got together and basically leveraged the PGA Tour, said, hey, if you don't make these changes, we're gone. Now, having said that, it's a pretty naive and unrealistic expectation that professional golfers are going to like perfectly navigate the business world and perfectly leverage the PGA Tour to make the best outcome happen. So in that regard, like I can't hold it against some of the players. And for some of the players, it was very clearly the right decision for them. Other players, I think they made the wrong decision because they prioritized the wrong thing. But that, that's not what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, we're a little bit off track, but I mean, you still have to let the business people run the PGA Tour to a sense, right? But they can't be making the decisions that they've made.
That's the point that Lucas Glover made, which I think was awesome. He was like, look, we have no business like having this much control over the business side of things. We're golfers. We're not businessmen. And he made the point that like in no other sport do the players have this much control. They have a position in the players union or something like that. But it's a really interesting point. I think he's right. And it also just goes to show how in the search for the right solution, it's like we've had this conversation before. The changes to the PGA Tour, and while some have been improvements, it's kind of all been the players leveraging the tour for the players and not what's best for the fans. Well, we, the fans, have just been kind of left in the aftermath, which is why we now think that there is some kind of resolution where the existence of live and some kind of agreement actually takes golf forward from where we're at right now.
And we can move on after this. Last point is about Monahan, and any great CEO of any business, right? Everybody, I think most people that watch the show know I own my own business now. I run a $3 million company, right? It's not like I'm running a $200,000 company. Like we do a lot of work, and I've played golf. But his biggest problem is when he makes a mistake, he doesn't admit it and change it. He runs with it, and he just hammers it home rather than saying, hey, guys, I tried this. It didn't work on the business side. This is what we're going to do to change it. This is what we can do to make it better. And then let's move around and do that. And the great CEOs of the world, right, make more good decisions than they do bad, and that's why they continue to grow their company. So I think until you get somebody with less pride that is just a little bit smarter about golf and the fans and that kind of stuff in there, we're going to see the same problems.
I think that's an excellent point. With that, we can kind of go to the next conversation, the big takeaway. we have talked for a long, long time in the show about how I think the best way to say it is the guys who quote unquote can't win until they do. And then once they do, that narrative is gone, which basically means the narrative should never have existed in the first place. We see that with Xander. And I don't necessarily want to rehash that topic, that conversation, because we've had it so much. But I will add one thing to the conversation, which is it isn't always the case, or it doesn't need to always be the case, that a player was like never bad in those moments to begin with, and they just hadn't actually won yet. But there's also this element of maybe Xander wasn't ready to win a year ago, 6 months ago, something like that. But his experiences in that time helped him get to a point where now he can win. So even if you are correct that a player hasn't had the stones to win previously, it doesn't mean that he's not going to have the stones to win the next time he's in contention. We can never know that. Maybe Xander learned from his loss to Rory that, hey, he has to go out with more of an attacking mentality and has to go kind of take the win instead of just hoping it falls to him. But in any case, I think it's just yet another reason why we need to always remember guys who can't win until they do, and then the narrative falls away. It's just it shouldn't exist in the first place.
It kind of reminds me of the Colin Cowherd. That's the segment about what he got right and what he got wrong. And this is one of the things that amongst the whole industry that we've gotten right the entire time. I think both of us have stood behind this from day one, that we always thought that it would happen with him, that he was the most talented, or one of the most talented out there. He's an elite golfer. Obviously, you don't be in contention that many times without being elite. And then it finally happened. But I think it's a lot of that comes from our golf experience over just the betting and the numbers and the gambling and all of that stuff. It's just a time thing, and it was going to happen. I'm glad. I wanted DeChambeau to win, in all honesty, but I'm really happy that he won. We hear nothing but good things about Xander, and that, just being a good person, never changed. And he's not the last one that we're going to say that about probably this year. So
speaking of, I think like the perfect test for this theory is Theegala, because Theegala has been in contention a bunch. Yeah, he has the one win, but he's been really outspoken about how nervous he feels once he gets near contention. Like even on the Saturday, he started really poorly, wasn't swinging well, continued to like take a hand off the club in the follow through, which I always think is a pretty bad sign of where you're at mentally. And then all of a sudden he caught fire, came back, and he said like he felt like he found a way to battle the nerves and almost use them to his advantage. Obviously that didn't happen on Sunday. So the question is, can we apply the same logic why we continue to back Xander to Theegala and basically say that, maybe the next time he gets a contention, he'll be more prepared for it, or he'll just have a different outcome just because it's the randomness of golf.
Yeah. And the more times you're there, the more you're going to learn. Right. So I actually took a golf lesson last week from Stephen Bowditch, one of my really good friends. He's always helped me when I'm struggling, and I was struggling, and he's great. But one of his big things that he always said is learning how your body reacts. He's Australian, so he called it under the pump, right? Under the gun. Yeah. He said it's just a learned effect because I had always said, like, I always putt better when I'm super nervous. And I don't know why, but the more money it's worth, the better I am. And it doesn't make any sense, right? It shouldn't be that way. But he was talking about that and learning how your body reacts when it gets nervous. I think Theegala is so much newer at this and being in contention than Xander, right? Xander's been in contention. We've known about Xander a lot longer than we've known about Theegala, so to speak. So I think the more times he's there, the more he's going to learn. He's obviously uber talented. And even like listening to his press conference, they were talking about his world golf ranking. He's like, I don't think there's 10 players in the world better than me. So he obviously has the confidence to do it. It's just about getting his body right and learning. Like you said, when he said, I was encouraged when he said that he felt like he figured out a way to use it to his advantage, because that's a huge step. And even I don't know if they showed him a few times at the end of the round on Sunday, and you could tell when he made like a long one for birdie on 17 or something. It was almost like weight just off his shoulders, right? But I couldn't tell, and obviously I I didn't go back through the round or anything. It's hard to see all of his shots of like, maybe did he hit better shots that maybe didn't end up as good as maybe the shots were, or were they pure struggle, right? So I'd like to know that too, because golf is still highly volatile. So maybe he played better on Sunday than his score. Probably not good enough to win, right? You don't play that bad, but to stay in contention.
He had a stretch from like 7 through 13 where he could have made 3 or 4 birdies and gotten himself right back in and just didn't make the putts. Like he had a hard lip out from 20 feet on 8. He hit the ball to like 12 and 13 feet or something like that on maybe 12 and 13. I can't remember exactly which holes. Missed those putts. So he was giving himself chances to go on that run that he went on Saturday, and it just never got started. But man, he was kind of struggling all around to start the day, other than that like huge bomb. I think it's so interesting because in a way, PGA Tour players have this huge advantage over us, for example, like when we're playing on mini tours and trying to get our first win there. Because if I'm Sahith Theegala, I am watching that Sunday broadcast back, and the thing that I'm noticing is that it was way too emotional on every single shot, caring way too much about the result of every single shot. Like on number 2, for example, one of the hardest holes on the course, he's coming out of the first cut, pulls his approach a little bit. He was like 195 out. Ball goes to the back left of the green. It's clearly not an easy putt. But, dude, you just made a 55-footer on the first for birdie. You're on the green in 2. Why are you standing there like complaining about either your swing or how the ball got so deep? Just go up there, 2-putt. You're 1 under through 2, tied for the lead. Like, you're in a fantastic spot. He was just, I think, way, way, way too emotionally invested and reactive to every single shot early on. And there was just no way that he was going to be able to sustain that for 18 holes and play well.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Like he's gonna learn, right? You would hope that he learns from that, and that's exactly what we're talking about. Is that hopefully he learns and benefits from being in this position. And I kind of want to segue this into the reason that I think Theegala is an elite player is because I feel like a course like Valhalla brings the elite player to the top. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that makes sense, but you have to hit it far. You have to hit your long irons, your mid irons really well. I don't love the idea of Valhalla because it's so long and it takes so many players out of play. But I do believe that course setup got your top 20 players in the world are going to be in the top 20, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Valhalla now has a pretty extensive history of getting fantastic leaderboards, which is almost surprising because I kind of hated the setup and the way that it was played. So I think it's always true that like one great test of a golf course, a litmus test, if you will, is what kind of leaderboard does it produce? And in that regard, Valhalla passes with flying colors every single time. But my biggest complaint about the course is I think that even if the fairways and greens were really firm, not soft the way they were, but if they were really firm, I still think scores would have been pretty low. There just isn't much of a defense for the course. I don't think the rough was difficult enough. I think in way too many cases, the hazards, like number 2, the hazard left of the fairway, is just too far out of play for these guys. Like, yeah, you're going to have some in the field who just play really poorly, make a bunch of bad swings, go left into that hazard. But on Sunday, you could see in the broadcast, the view was like from the right side of the fairway. So left misses looked like, okay, they missed the fairway. They might be down in that hazard. They were like 15 yards away from the hazard, still just harmlessly in the rough. So I think in that regard, I would have liked a more difficult golf course, which I think would then present more high leverage shots than what it had. So I think if you want to like condense my take, it's that it's not challenging enough, even if the conditions were more difficult. And part of the reason for that is there aren't enough high leverage shots.
So I agree for the most part, probably 80% agree. I think if you make the greens firm, it becomes a lot harder immediately. Mm-hmm. Shots out of the first cut become more difficult. I think that what most people overlook of why that place is so easy, especially when it's soft, is if you do miss a green, you have a perfect lie. That stuff is so easy to chip out of that it just for these guys, it's just so predictable. It's you don't even have to hit it perfect. It's just very easy to chip out there. So I think that's why you see these guys that are elite at everything, whether they had to chip a lot or not, always work their way to the top of the leaderboard because of that factor, right? And Josh and I had a little back and forth on Twitter about this, of how to make this harder, right? And make it to where shorter hitters are more in play. And the only answer is progressive rough. You're never going to see that. But if there's less rough at the 200-yard marker than there is the 100-yard marker, you are going to see shorter players have a better chance. I don't think you'll ever see the PGA Tour do it. I'd love to see them do it. I think it'd be awesome. You know, if it was an inch and a half at the 200-yard marker, and then it was 2 inches at the 150 and 3 inches at the 100, and now, you know, do you see a noticeable difference?
Yeah, I think that's one potential solution. Another one is just more bunkering, where, like Roy talked about it, especially at Quail Hollow, where there are a number of holes where he's able to take the bunker out of play because of his length. And I think that's true on a lot of golf courses. And as these guys get longer and longer, it's true for more and more of the field. So if you just put another bunker in there, great. That kind of solves it, right? You take like the exact same thought of, okay, this bunker exists in this place on the hole for what purpose? All right. Now the guys are longer. To make a new bunker with the same purpose, I'm just going to put it 20 yards further. That's fairly.
It has to be a penalizing bunker now, though, too, because there's, I mean, like in today's game, they literally rake them so perfect. You always, especially out there, it's not like playing my home club, right? Out there, you're going to have a perfect lie every time. So it has to be something with a lip, or, you know, some kind of I think it was Memorial one year, Jack, that he raked them with those, like, basically they took every other other deal out of it, right? And it was, then all of a sudden it was like, oh, this is hard.
I think that's a great idea. And then the other thing there is, like, the Valhalla bunkers just aren't very deep. So we consistently saw, like, a guy drives it into a fairway bunker. You think, oh, that's a guaranteed layup. Nope, he's still going for it because there's just no lip trouble of any kind. And even around the greens, it's like the depth of bunkers matters a ton, because especially on soft greens, if there's not a lot of depth to the bunker, you're just going to be able to stop that bunker shot pretty much whenever you want. If the bunker goes 4 feet down, 5 feet down, something like that, now the ball's landing on a much shallower angle. It's going to roll out a lot more. So more depth to the bunkers, I think, would also help that place become more challenging for the next time that it hosts. So plenty of ideas, but there was one other aspect of the PGA Championship that got a ton of attention that I think is absolutely phenomenal, and that is the Johnson Wagner segments, these chipping segments. So for anyone who hasn't watched, I cannot possibly recommend enough that you go on YouTube and you search Johnson Wagner PGA Championship and watch the 2 clips where he's chipping, one from the fairway, one from rough. They are absolute comedy gold. The first one, he's trying to recreate the Xander pitch shot on Thursday, where he spun in a number 4 to 3 inches or something like that. He warns us ahead of time that he's got the chipping yips. Chunks won, Blades won. The rest of the crew just starts laughing. Fast forward to Saturday, and he's trying to recreate the double bogey that Xander made, where he went long into the really thick rough, just got it onto the regular rough, couldn't get up and down. And Thigala, also long of the green in the rough, chips in for birdie. Heel shank and toe shank. And again, the crew just loses it. They can't help themselves but to laugh. I made the point that I think it's the absolute best TV in terms of, like, post-game, pre-game, anything like that, alongside of Inside the NBA on TNT with Shaq, with Charles Barkley.
Yeah.
It's the only thing in my mind that compares to that, and it's so cool that golf has its own version.
Yeah, no doubt. And the Shaq Barkley deal, like, they have the perfect. There's nothing better than that whole deal. Like, it is. I mean, it's comedy, and Barkley's a lot of that. But yeah, Johnson Wagner's. We're not that far removed from him being in contention in PGA Tour events, right? And I think Colt Knost does a really good job too. You know, on the broadcast, I think he's a big part of why they have success. I don't know if he was part of that that segment or not. It wouldn't surprise me, him laughing at Johnson Wagner. We just need more real life, right? Everybody gets on this broadcast. They think all of these guys are all so good and stuff like that. Now you're watching a PGA Tour player struggle to do anything. And he can take it with a grain of salt too. They're laughing, like he's not getting mad. He's embarrassing himself and he doesn't care.
Well, and he deserves so much credit because I'm sure he has a big say, maybe even like 100% say in which shot, which moment he's going to recreate. Knowing he's got the chipping yips to make that decision twice is awesome. It's absolutely awesome.
Yeah, I'm surprised he didn't be like, "Hey, Colt, come hit this shot," or somebody else. Somebody come do this for me.
All right. So this begs a question. Let's say you're Johnson Wagner, and you, Justin, have Johnson Wagner's role, and producer says to you, "Hey, I want you to recreate this shot." What is the type of shot that makes you the most nervous to try and pull off on live TV?
Well, there's a couple that would be the key, right? Is how uncomfortable are you to be embarrassed, right? So that would be the two. So like, this is probably going to be a surprise, but like right now, I think in golf period, the most embarrassing shot is a tight lie chip that you just hit 1 foot in front of you. And I'm pretty good at that. But if I knew national TV was watching and I had to hit that shot, I would have to drink 6 Coors Lights before I hit it just to make sure I wasn't nervous to do it. I mean, and maybe if I was practicing all the time, that wouldn't be the case. But I just think those little tight lie chips can embarrass you. Now, that being said, if they had like a TrackMan up and I had to hit a driver and I hit this like toe slammer out there that flew 240, I'd probably be pretty embarrassed as well. But, that you just kind of shake your head. You're like, I'll just chip out, whatever. But, yeah, the chip shots, man. The one out of the rough, I was surprised he hit it so bad because it's just a glorified bunker shot. Mm-hmm. The tight lie stuff, like that's if you got the chipping yips, it's a real thing.
So there's an interesting part of this conversation too, because I think like the go-to answer for a lot of people would be like, "Oh, a long bunker shot." But the thing is, if you mess up a long bunker shot, everybody knows it's a difficult shot.
Yeah.
When you're smack dab right in front of the green on the fairway with lies that everyone has talked about how easy they are, and then you mess up, that's embarrassing. So I think you're on the right track there. The first thing that came to my mind is also a simple one. It's having to hit a draw of any kind. Just put me on a tee box with a shot tracer and say, hit a 10-yard draw with your driver. And it starts 30 yards right and goes 30 more yards right. Or I pull it, starts left and goes 30 yards left. That would be embarrassing. So for me, I think that's the answer. I don't ask me to hit a draw off the tee. I can't do it.
And it's usually something that you like you're good at, right? Something that you do, like you drive the ball well. You wouldn't think that hitting any kind of driver would be something. It's just like me with chipping. You wouldn't think that would be something I go to, but I think, when you do something well, it comes with expectations that you could do it at any time as well. So definitely not the exact answer most people would expect, but yeah, those little simple chips are high anxiety.
They sure are. And they're extra high anxiety when you know that everyone expects you to do it well and you just have a seed of doubt. Just a seed of doubt can really turn into something worse.
Golf's a humbling game.
It sure is. It sure is. All right, we are now, let's see, we're 33 minutes into the show. It's time to talk some Charles Schwab picks. It's a pretty strong field, again, for the week after a major, especially considering that it's not an elevated event. And everything starts with Scottie Scheffler, $13,300 on DraftKings. I think I saw plus 275 to win. What would you estimate our win odds for him are?
Oh, I'm just knowing that I'm sure they're super high, but I mean, probably 36%.
That's an excellent guess. 33.9%. Definitely the highest we've seen this year. Completely absurd. It steals so much win equity from the rest of the field that it's going to be a lot harder to find outrights. We do have 2 this week, but man, he's soaking up so much. This is going to be an incredibly difficult decision on DraftKings, especially whether or not to play him, because that $13,300, $2,300 more than the second most expensive player, Colin Morikawa. So price prohibitive, and yet I still think he could end up with one of the higher ownerships that we've seen this year too. So he could either have the lowest GPP score we've seen this season or the highest GPP score we've seen this season, and neither one will surprise me. Just don't know what ownership's going to look like yet.
So this is a good. Let's just a good time to back up to last week. Obviously, we're a long time into the show and haven't talked about what happened with Scheffler and all that stuff. I don't really want to get involved in opinions of what happened. We don't know what happened. Let's more talk about the effect of what happened on the golf course. And I know that you have a pretty interesting take on what happened. So I think this would be a good time to let's talk about that and then how that segues into this week.
Yeah, that's a good point. So when Scottie was interviewed after his round on Saturday, the first bad round of golf that he's played in a long time, he talked about how he never felt like he settled into the round, that he just never got his feet under him for the round, for the day. And he obviously referenced the fact that, he was arrested the day before. So he kind of put everything on that. And my take is that the arrest, all of that, had very little to do with his poor performance on Saturday, and that it was a lot more about Ted Scott's absence. Now, I think the fact that he was dealing with something chaotic already compounded the absence of Ted Scott on Saturday. But I think if Ted Scott was still in the bag, arrest still obviously occurring, I think he would have played just fine on Saturday.
So I think that is correct, or a lot of that is correct. I mean, obviously we don't know Scottie personally. A couple of things there too. Friday's round, it all happened so fast, and he went out there and went straight to the tee. I don't think he had time to realize the repercussions. I think when, Friday night, he had time to realize what he had been charged with, what could happen, the repercussions of what could happen. That becomes a little bit more high anxiety because Scottie is a really good person. And I don't, I think that makes it a little bit harder on him that he's, I doubt he's ever been in trouble in his whole life. And, to have this happen on national TV and the embarrassment that maybe comes with it to him, whether he believes it or not, might have had a little bit more effect just because of the time to think, right? So the Friday stuff, he didn't have time to think. The owner of Valhalla picked him up, and he basically went straight to the tee. Not having Ted Scott maybe could have just done and I'm probably generally saying that I wouldn't go with that. I think this is the rare occasion where that relationship, player-caddy relationship, really, really would have helped him. And I mentioned this on Twitter. It's small world, but Brad Payne caddied for him. He's the chaplain on the PGA Tour. I beat Brad in a playoff to get into the USAM in 2001. So I've known Brad for a long time, and he's a super good dude too. I have nothing but good things to say about him. So, I know Scottie and Brad are pretty good friends, but I think Brad was probably he didn't know what to do either, right? What do you say to somebody in that spot, not just carrying their bag, but after that happens to him the night before?
Yeah, 100%. So I think without question, he had an entirely different Saturday morning than he would have otherwise had. My whole point is that I think he would have had no trouble dealing with that and still playing well if once he got inside the ropes, everything was as it usually is. Just he and Ted Scott attacking the golf course. I think the fact that he also had to deal with this irregularity on the course is what made it so difficult for him to, in his own words, get his feet under him.
It's just a speculation right at this point of how it all affected. I wouldn't say that. I mean, the only story I even know that's similar to that is back in when I was playing the Tightwise Tour, and a guy got a DWI after playing in the Pro-Am and was first off the next morning and shot 67 and was leading. So, I mean, I've seen stuff like this happen, but not to got nothing like this, right? Obviously, not the best player in the world. But do you think now, going back to this week, does all of this that's happened, now he's coming basically back home, he lives in Dallas, is this a benefit to him to come back home, to play again this week? Or is it harder knowing that you're back in front of your friends and your home crowd and having to deal with what happened and all of that?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the returning home aspect of it, but I will say my big takeaway to my thought that it's more about Ted Scott and less about what's going on is that I think now that Ted Scott's back on the bag, he should have a fine week. He should still be Scottie Scheffler this week, so I think he's going to play really well. There's one thing I want to point out from our projections about Scottie that speaks volumes, I think. If you look at most players and you compare their top 40 odds to their missed cut odds, Morikawa, for example, 67% for a top 40, 80% to make the cut. Spieth, 48% for a top 40, 68% to make the cut. Scheffler, 95% for a top 40, 95.9% for a missed cut. They're so close together because he's so damn good that the likelihood that he barely makes that cut and also plays poorly for Saturday and Sunday is just that low. Like he's almost as likely to finish in the top 40 as he is to make the cut because there's just like it's almost an impossibility that he would make it to the weekend and then still play poorly then. It's unbelievable to see that kind of similarity between top 40 and missed cut. Blows my mind.
And the problem is every time you think he's going to like take a week off and finish 40th, he'll be like 50th going to the weekend and shoot 262s and finish third, like just out of nowhere. It truly is amazing. I mean, I don't even know what else to call it, right? It's just amazing, the whole thing.
He has a significantly more than double expected strokes gained projection than the second highest, which is Morikawa. 2.76 for Scottie, 1.28 for Colin. So again, figuring out how to navigate the slate is basically all about the starting decision of, do I play Scottie or not? And until we get ownership projections dialed in, he could be the worst play of the season. He could be the best play of the season. I just don't know yet.
Yeah, and I agree. It'll be interesting to see how he plays. I personally am probably going to stay away from him just because I think there's too much else. There's too many unknowns of everything else that's going on. You know, he's going to be at home with his kid all week. He's going, in between rounds, is that going to take? And I know we hear this narrative of a lot of times people play better just because they're more mindless. I don't know what applies to Scottie Scheffler anymore because he's just such an outlier. He's just so good.
First outright of the week, Keegan Bradley, 60-1 for me. I think he's still available at 60 as a pure outright. I have him as an each way bet. There's a lot I like about this. Number one, he's just he pops in the model. We've got him at 2.1% to win, so there's clear value there. Always one of the more volatile guys, which again we like volatility down here. But the big thing for me is his iron play has been spectacular for about 4 consecutive events now. The thing that was missing was the driver. And then at the PGA Championship, he was long. He was incredibly accurate. It was his best driving performance in a hell of a long time, especially of this season. So if he can continue to drive it like that, when he was already gaining a ton of irons and now he's driving it well enough to give himself more and more opportunities, all we need is a small spike from his putter, and he's going to be right there in contention. So I love Keegan at 60. I think he should be more like 35 or 40 in this field. He
was my first click at 8,100 when I went through and make just kind of a preemptive of lineup. So I obviously really like him this week. Something to be noted is with this redo of Colonial, one of the major changes is they increased the length of the par threes and move the greens around some. So the 17, always had the pond in play. There's a creek in play now. It was made a little bit longer. 4 is still 250 yards. They removed some of the bunkering, so that has a little bit more. You can run it up. I think that was more a membership move than it was a PGA Tour move. Not very many PGA Tour players does that affect. So another really long one. The one, I think it's 13. Was always the really notable par 3 with the water short and right with the wall. That kind of had the funnel that would move the ball back to the hole. The green complex stayed the same, but they did move that green back into the right, so it became another 20 to 30 yards longer. So I would say if you are going to change anything here, you're going to have 4 chances to hit mid to long irons. So I think that becomes maybe a little bit higher, in what I'm going to use for stats wise. I will probably move mid to long iron play up a little bit more than most models are going to show, just because of the redo. And the other thing is if you are reaching the par fives, well, especially 11, it's going to be a long iron or 3-wood.
So let's talk about this course fit medal. We have negative 17% on driving distance, so 17% less predictive than usual, 9% less predictive than usual for driving accuracy, 30% more predictive than usual on approach play, 17% more predictive than usual short games, 20% more predictive than usual putting. So less driving, more of the rest of the game. How do you think that model is going to change, or does that seem right in line with your expectations now after the redesign?
I think a lot of the changes are sight lines and a little bit of length here and there, moving of greens, the way. I think that the model shows a lot of just how hard some of these fairways are to hit no matter what. They're just really difficult dogleg fairways where there's not much area to cut corners and there's not much being aggressive. I mean, JJ Colleen said on Twitter that the tee shot on number 5 at Colonial is the hardest tee shot that anybody on the PGA Tour will have all year. That's pretty impressive from a PGA Tour player to say that that's the hardest tee shot that any player will see all year. Shows you really how hard it is. And that's another one for another guy that I'm going to like this week, which you're going to be not surprised by with Minwoo Lee, is that he can hit 2-iron, 6-iron into that green where a lot of guys are going to, be hitting driver and 5 or 6 iron. So it's just they're really hard to hit.
I'm trying to find an overview of some kind of the 5th hole so we can show why it's such a difficult driving hole. But why don't you just describe it? Because I'm not.
It's
really
just a 460 or 70 yard dogleg right. It's got the Trinity and big trees down the right. Mm-hmm. Huge trees, so there's no capability of cutting the corner. If you hit it straight, you hit it through the fairway into another group of trees and long rough, and you have basically no shot to the green. I mean, it's just a hard hole, and there's no spot to bail out. There's no real layup. There's no laying back, because if you lay back too far, you have no shot to the green around the corner. It's just a really, really hard tee shot.
I'd also say the green is guarded enough that there's also like this huge premium on actually getting some distance off the tee so that the next shot isn't equally as difficult as the tee shot. Because if you just say, oh, this tee shot's too demanding, give me my 4-iron, or even, give me a hybrid or a 5-wood, something like that, you're just delaying the really difficult shot one more to the approach shot. You're not, it's not necessarily a more conservative decision because the next one's just going to be that much harder.
Yeah, and so, I mean, like I said, that's just a bold statement for a guy that plays on the PGA Tour to call this the hardest tee shot they'll see all year. I mean, there's another one like I think it's 3 is a long dogleg left that if you hit a perfect draw around the corner, you might have 8 or 9 iron in too, but it's really easy to hit it through the fairway. There's no taking a more aggressive line because it just flies into the trees no matter how far you hit it. It's got a lot of holes that are just like that, and I think that's why you see such. I mean, I don't remember what won last year, but the score wasn't very low.
And just to be a little bit clear about how the course fit model works, with that description, it would make sense for someone to say, well, hey, if the shot's so difficult, if it's so important, then why does driving matter less this week than usual? It's almost difficult to the point where it's harder to predict who's going to drive the ball well on that hole and on other holes like it, where distance and accuracy matter a little bit, yet a little bit less than usual from a predictive standpoint, because again, it's harder for us to predict who's going to drive the ball well. We know that when they go to Quail Hollow, Rory is going to gain a ton of strokes off the tee. Every single hole, he has a massive length advantage. Every single hole, he has a massive accuracy advantage. And we know he's likely to take advantage of both on each of those holes and throughout the day cumulatively as well.
Well,
even though we know who's the best driver, who's the longest, who's the most accurate, it's a lot harder to predict who's going to actually perform the best off the tee.
And the holes that are driver, everybody's, they're really hard to hit the fairway, right? They're really hard. And then the rest of the holes, everybody's hitting a 3-wood or hitting a 2-iron or even a 4-iron to the same spot. So they're not even getting to hit a driver to take advantage of it, right? There's very few holes out there that the best driver of the golf ball is at any advantage at all, let alone a huge advantage. So it just makes the model make sense.
This might be the only course on tour that I can think of where the course fit model is very anti-driving, if you will, and yet we have had a track record of success with the course. Like typically we have our best weeks when driving distance, driving accuracy around the green play are the things that pop more than the approach and putting that people spend so much time looking at. This is one of the few exceptions where it's all about approach play, short games, putting, a lot less about off the tee performance. And yet we've done quite well. And I think it's just because this model is super unique. It's also one of the most reliable. It's one of the strongest. So we are more confident that what the course fit model is telling us this week is dead on accurate than we are on many other weeks on tour.
Yeah. And they did put bent grass back in so that you don't have to worry about the chances of having new greens like Quail Hollow where they were super firm because they were new. Bent grass generally doesn't come in near as firm as like Bermuda does right out of the chute. Yeah. That being said, they might be firm. I haven't seen anything. I know we're supposed to get rain here Wednesday night and Thursday morning, so that'll soften it up some. That would be the only.
I think if they did firm up, it would just reinforce everything the course fit model is telling us. If the greens are firmer, okay, you have to be better with your irons. Approach play is already 30% more predictive. If the greens are firmer, you're probably going to miss more greens. Around the green play is already more predictive than usual. And then, maybe putting would suffer a little bit as those two went up, and maybe distance would become a little bit more predictive just because then you're getting the effect of, it's not necessarily that driving further is going to help, but having more speed, having more loft into clubs, being able to hit the ball higher, spin it more, all things that are correlated with driving distance could play a larger role. So I don't think it would really change anything for me. And quite frankly, it's not like these greens have historically been super soft or anything.
Yeah. I agree. And it's, the time of year is very weather dependent for us especially with bent grass here of how firm they can get them without killing them. I know last year they were super aggressive because they were blowing the place up right after they left. Right. So they were super aggressive with the greens because when the tour ended, when the tour got done, they literally destroyed the whole golf course and started over. So, that has a little bit to do with last year's effect. One of the guys that I'd love to hear your take on that it's kind of a home game for is Tom Hoge, right? He played at TCU, lives in the Fort Worth area. Obviously, always been pretty good on small greens, good iron player. Do you like a guy that's playing a home game, or do you think that at this level it doesn't matter?
I don't think home games matter. I don't think it matters in terms of home course. I don't think it certainly don't think it matters just geographical. He's home.
Yeah.
All that being said, I think, I think a better way to put it is if something like that matters, it's always going to show up in ownership anyway. So you're better off just ignoring it. Currently, we do have Hoge projecting quite well. I think his 1.06 expected strokes gained this week is third best in the field, only behind Scottie and Colin. So I do think this is a week where we could be pretty high on Hoge. His approach play is phenomenal. Very clearly second best in this field, only behind Scottie. Morikawa's approach play has actually suffered quite a bit. He only rates as highly as he does because driving accuracy has been unbelievably good and his short game has been unbelievably good. His iron play's been fine, pretty good, but even Finau is well ahead of Colin right now in terms of iron play. Keegan's well ahead, Straka's well ahead, Keith Mitchell's well ahead, Lucas Glover's well ahead, Rye Berger. So Morikawa has room to grow in that. area, at least. Like I think you can make an argument that maybe Morikawa has a little bit more upside than we're projecting, because if the irons come back, which theoretically they could at any time, to complement his approach play, or to complement his driving accuracy and his around the green play, that would be quite the combination.
Yeah, and I don't know what to think of Morikawa, because he just seems like he's in a good place, and he's obviously been playing well in the last couple of weeks. He had one bad round at Quail Hollow the last round, in the final group last week. He's just this place makes more sense for him in my mind, but the numbers don't agree with that, right? So what we know of Morikawa, you would think this place would be good for him, but I don't think that I necessarily agree with that factor of him going to play that well here.
I would definitely prefer to use him somewhere where driving accuracy matters a ton. I think you and I discussed this, like for one and done especially, I really want to run all of the course fit models for the rest of the year, so we can kind of almost map things out at this point where it would help to know, like, is there a week where driving accuracy is so important that that's when we want to use Morikawa?
Yeah. We used him a couple weeks ago, so we can. I'm going to lean into Hoagie this week. I think is probably who I'm gonna want to play in the one and done. I could get behind Keegan as well, but I just think that small greens. He's played the redo. He's just got a little bit more. I think the reason I asked about the home game is I don't think that the home game necessarily matters, especially when it's the same stop on the PGA Tour for several years. I think after the redo, he's going to know the conditions a little bit better. And this place already – so it's already a really good place for him to play well. I think it just helps a little bit more.
I think that's fair. In terms of one and done, I think you kind of named the guys that I was thinking of as well. Keegan is up there for me. I think Hoagie is a strong play. I'm a little bit concerned that Hoagie will be fairly popular, but we just have to kind of wait and see what ownership looks like on DraftKings, and we'll be able to kind of infer what it's going to be like in the one and done. The other name for me is Sepp Straka that I think is worth noting. I have an outright on Straka. He's my second outright. I've got him at 50-1 with an each way. I believe he's available still at 45 everywhere, which I think is still a phenomenal number. We've got him at 3% to win, actually the third highest win equity, because of how volatile he is week to week and the fact that he's projecting 0.92 expected strokes gained. Hoagie, who's, again, third in expected strokes gained, is at 1.06. So not a lot of separation there, and he's super volatile. He's got again, just a really, really strong iron player, also one of the better putters in this field. So if it comes down to just, if he's playing his best, the fact that he's weak around the green is going to matter less, right? He's hitting more greens. He's consistently taking the wedges, the chip shots, the bunker shots out of his hands, putting putter in his hands. It's why we see him just go insanely low sometimes, because, man, when he's on, he's on.
Yeah, no doubt. And to just further your point, so I caddied at the John Deere, not the year he won, but I caddied there, and I would say Colonial and the John Deere have a lot of similar characteristics. So knowing that he won there last year or the year before, and knowing what I know about Colonial, same type of green. The greens were both bent. The Deere is different. Different rough. It's not Bermuda, but outside of that, pretty similar take. So just knowing what I know about both golf courses and being on site for both courses and the way that they set up 4 tournaments, I know that kind of sounds like a surprise, because the scores are so much lower at the Deere than they are at the Colonial. I think that's just a little bit of the way that it's set up, and not necessarily the type of course that it is. And I think you'll see this year with them not being as aggressive with the greens, because they don't want to lose them after just reopening, that you might see a little bit softer conditions. Yeah,
I agree there. So we've got some options here in the one and done. Anyone else that you want to touch on from a DraftKings perspective? Any potential cheap gems on your mind this week?
I mean, I don't know how cheap he is. I like Aaron Rye a little bit this week. I think he could have a good week. I just like the way he hits his irons. That, I'm hearing a lot of talk about Dietrich. I'm not sure about Dietrich, that he's maybe in the conversation. Doug Gim is a UT guy that played with Spieth that I think could have a good week. That's really about it. Spieth is really polarizing just because he's played so good here. And I think, you just listen to his interviews, like he believes he's close. So yep. We may see a Spieth awakening this week.
There are a couple guys that are on the cheaper end that I think are fairly interesting. One is Sung Hyun Kim. And the reason he's interesting to me is because typically when we play him, we want a course fit model similar to what we had at the Byron Nelson. Like, pretty awesome, by the way, that week he was a perfect course fit and he finishes fourth. And it's like his only great finish of the entire season. It's his only great finish in September. And he was the perfect course fit model there. But there are some signs that he's becoming a little bit less course fit dependent, where both around the green and putting has been great. So you get that aspect of the course fit model. His biggest weakness historically has been approach play. It is still a weakness, but it's no longer the negative like 0.4 to negative 0.5 that we were seeing early in the year. It's down to negative 0.22, or I guess technically it's up to negative 0.22. And it's been serviceable. He was pretty neutral with his approach play at the PGA Championship. He was ever so slightly positive at the Byron Nelson, was bad at Myrtle Beach, but was neutral at the Texas Open, the Houston Open, the Valspar, actually gained a little bit at the Players with his irons. So if there's any kind of growth whatsoever in that aspect of his game, then I just think he's a much better player than what was his price this week? 6,700. Like, I think if we're seeing any real progress with his iron play, I think he's a $7,500 to $8,000 player in this field.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing you hit on there is I don't think he's going to be. I think he's another guy that's learning, maybe at a different level of learning, but he's not going to be just a course fit guy, and it's a good time to maybe get ahead of the curve of hey, it doesn't really matter where he's at. He's just a better player than his price range.
There are some other guys who are significantly better course fits than they are just, baseline talent-wise. Dylan Wu also stands out to me. He loses a ton off the tee, both in distance and accuracy. Very strong irons, pretty neutral around the green, strong putter. So there are some very interesting names in those low 6,000s. Grayson Murray, he's a better driver than anything else, but 6,100 I think is just low for his price. And I think Grayson especially is going to be a showdown target, because even going back to the days when I was playing against him on the mini tours, there's a 63 waiting to happen every single time he tees it up. He's one of those guys who just, you never know when he's going to go low, but he can go low at any time.
I agree completely about it. He's always kind of been like that, just super, super high upside. And I just have a hard time backing him, and that's just personal, but I don't hate that call, because you're right. Like, talk about volatile. If he goes out with his buddies all week, he might WD after the first round. The other thing is he might shoot 63, 65. So, there's some interesting ones down there at the end. A lot of local ties down there at the bottom, just because there's so many guys that live here in DFW. Hayden Springer, Austin Smotherman. There's a lot of guys down there that I think could break out just because, just being around here. And I think they're more talented than maybe how they've shown so far on the PGA Tour.
I even think you could go all the way down 5,400, 5,300. We got Troy Merritt, Matthew Neesmith looking pretty good in the projection. So might be an interesting week to MME a little bit using the PGA Optimizer over at FTN. That's going to be a lot of fun. Hey, on your way out, everybody, like the show, please. And why don't you drop in the comments the shot that you would be most uncomfortable with hitting on live TV in Johnson Wagner fashion. So Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.